So when I built my shipping container home over 2 years ago, I had zero prior construction experience. Needless to say, I made a few mistakes along the way, and in this video I'm going to show you what they were and the things I wished I knew before building a container home. Join me on my journey from construction to completion of my mortgage-free home on a homestead. So with this first mistake that I made, we're here on top of the roof. It really had me puzzled trying to find out the cause. But it basically comes down to these two roof vents right here. Basically, the problem was anytime I'd turn on an exhaust fan like this microwave or the bathroom vent, after a minute or so I'd start to smell a faint sewer smell in the house. After much speculation and trial and error, I finally found out the problem. It basically comes down to these roof vents and the roof boots that slide over it and seal everything in. The best way for me to explain to you what went wrong is to go into the 3D model I made of my home. So this was the installation procedure I came up with. First, cut a square hole out of the shipping container roof. Second, run the vent pipe through that hole. Third, insert a roof boot over the vent pipe. Here's an example of a roof boot. It basically fits over and around the vent pipe and has a flange at the base that sits on top of your finished roof. So basically insert the roof boot and press and mold the flange over the corrugated roof of the container. Also very important, bend in the top of the boot over and into the vent pipe so rainwater can't leak in between the vent pipe and the roof boot. Fourth, slather the entire base of the boot with Henry Tropical 887. This is the same white stuff I used to seal the entire roof. It's this white gooey substance that cures to waterproof the roof. And that's basically it. But there was one big mistake I overlooked. Let me show you. So you see that white stuff kind of caked inside here? It's kind of white colored stuff there. That is caulking. But that wasn't always there. In fact, once I put this caulking here around the inner rim, the problem was instantly resolved. What happened was, before I put the caulking here, there was a tiny gap between the roof boot and the pipe. As you can see, there's the vent pipe inside the boot. Now I bring the vent pipe up to its final location. With the boot bent over and into the vent pipe, you can see that there's this small air gap into the home. While rainwater would never leak through, sewer gas from the vent pipe could, right between this gap and down through the square hole I cut through the container roof, which is exactly what would happen every time I turn on an exhaust fan inside the house. And so by simply putting a bit of caulking around the inner rim here, the gap was sealed and the problem was instantly solved. Now, in a traditional home, this roof boot system might not have been an issue. But since container homes have extremely tight air envelopes, which is good for energy efficiency, container homes have tight air envelopes because nearly every seam is welded shut. The point is there aren't as many places for air to escape from. And so every time I turn the exhaust fan on, it has to take the air from somewhere. And so it went to what was possibly the most vulnerable spot, which was the little gap up there on the roof vents. Now, real quick before I show you the second mistake, a few months ago I announced on my channel that I'm offering services where I turn your shipping container home idea into a custom 3D model. Since then, I've been hired by over 40 viewers of this channel to bring their container homes to life in fully explorable 3D. My services include the final 3D model, various image drawings of the house with dimension measurements, and I can even create highly realistic images and video tours of the home if you really want to show off. So if you have a container home idea that you'd like to see brought to life in a fully explorable custom 3D model, feel free to email me using my email, which I have listed down in the description of this video, to learn more. So the second mistake I made was a real close call. Basically, you see that window right there and that window over there? Let me get up close and show you something. So with this first window here, you can see that there's that steel frame that kind of pops out of the corrugation and frames the entire window. Well, if I get up close and I measure, you should be able to see that there's about a 1/2 inch of a lip sticking out there, about a 1/2 inch of that steel frame popping out. Now, let me go to the other side and show you the other window. So if we get up close onto this window, you can see that the steel frame that surrounds the window is barely even sticking out like 1/8 of an inch. It is barely popping out past the corrugated walls. Basically, it was a mistake on my part, and it was complete luck and a close call that the window ended up even fitting to begin with. To explain what went wrong, let me first show you my procedure for installing the windows. First, I cut the big square hole out of the container that the window would fit in. Next, I took 2" by 2" angle irons, cut them into pieces, and assembled them into a square that could be inserted right into the opening I cut. As you can see from this exterior shot, there's that nice 1/2 inch lip extending outside the home. And so here's where I made the mistake. That window over there was installed on the long 40-foot side of the container, but this window here was installed on the short 8-foot side of the container. And what I completely failed to take into account is that the depth of the corrugated walls are different on the 40-foot side versus the 8-foot side. So if I bring you up close to the 40-foot side of the corrugated wall, you can see that the depth of the corrugation is about 1¼ inch. Then if I pull back and I go onto the short 8-foot side, you can see that the depth of the corrugation is a solid 1¾ of an inch, maybe a little bit more. You can just clearly see that the shape and depth is different. On the long 40-foot side, it's kind of a more shallow, wavy corrugation. But then on this side, they're more like deep trenches. So if we look in the model, you can see that when I slide the 2x2 angle iron frame into place, we've got that nice 1/2 inch lip sticking out. But when we go to the short side of the container, the angle iron only sticks out barely 1/8 of an inch. This is just something I completely overlooked. It didn't even occur to me until the day I was inserting the angle iron frames into place. As you can see from this footage, I had to use a bunch of clamps to really press the angle iron frame against the corrugation, so I had just enough of a lip to weld onto. Thankfully, it was just enough that everything turned out fine, but boy was it a close call. So this right here is the leftover pile of container walls that I cut out while building the home. If you didn't know, this is common practice with container homes. Unlike traditional homes, you don't have to build up your walls from scratch, you just gotta cut them out. So I actually went back into the 3D model and calculated it. I cut out around 230 linear feet of container walls, and I did it all with this. An angle grinder. Although I will say that an angle grinder does do a decent job cutting through these relatively thin container walls, the fact of the matter is when you're cutting 230 linear feet, I should have gotten a better tool for the job. I think a plasma cutter would have made things much easier. In total, it took me about 7 days straight of non-stop cutting, dawn to dusk, to cut out all the walls. So this mistake was something so simple, yet it would have saved me a ton of time and labor. So basically, let me show you. So if I wanted to cut out an entire wall of the shipping container, which is something I had to do inside the house, cut walls out to open up floor space, you would cut all the way at the top of the container wall, and you would cut all the way at the bottom. But let me show you something. If you get up close, you can kind of see right there that at the very top of the container is a really thick weld right there. In fact, if you look at the bottom of the container wall, you have the exact same thing. You've got these thick welds that run all along the bottom.
just really thick and hard to cut through, especially with an angle grinder.
So you might be wondering why I didn't just avoid cutting the welds. Well, there's two reasons. First, when cutting the bottom of the wall off, if I left that 3/16 inch tall weld down there, the floor would no longer be flat for the eventual floor tiles that I laid. Secondly, when cutting the top of the wall off, if I left that 3/16 inch tall weld, it would get in the way of the roof rafters. Basically, during the design process with my structural engineer, we'd established that the roof rafters would be set perfectly flush with the undersides of these top rails. That meant having to cut through these thick welds. But during the design phase, I was unaware that these welds even existed on a container, so it didn't occur to me. Now here's the thing, if I'd simply dropped the rafters down about 1/4 inch, at least it would have spared me doing the top part. I ended up having to get one of these grinder attachments and brutally, laboriously shave down these welds. And this was definitely one of those things where the 3D model came in extremely handy, just having all those measurements down, the dimensions of the rooms, where I would make those cuts. This 3D model is available to download right now. Just click the link in the description below. So imagine you're constructing a house and it's time to install roof rafters, and you suddenly realize that they don't fit. Well, this happened to me, but not in the way you might expect. I'm going to use this spare 20-foot shipping container to demonstrate what happened. So this is basically the design that my engineer came up with. You take a joist hanger. Obviously, in their actual house, there would have been wooden framing here. You nail your joist hanger into place. Then you take a 2x8 rafter, double 2x8s, on a single double joist, like so. So basically, we just take your first 2x8 rafter, you bring it over the top, and you slide it into place. No problem, everything works. Here's where the problem happened. When it was time to take the second 2x8 rafter and insert it, what would happen was you try to come over the top and you'd have to fit into that joist hanger, but what's happening is, if you look at the top up here, it's hitting the metal roof of the container. So if I try to come and put it in, it doesn't fit. Well, so you might be wondering, how did I actually go about installing it? What we did was, we started off with the joist hanger, but we only nailed the left side of the hanger and left the right side not nailed in. Came in, put the first one in, again, the left side nailed. Now with the right side not nailed, loose and at an angle, it gave us just enough room to come in, it fits, and then while it's here like this, push the joist hanger back on, and then nail it into place. Here's some footage from the roof rafter install, and you can kind of see that we're doing that whole procedure here. So these sliding doors were a really big feature on the home, and I really didn't want to screw them up. Unfortunately, once I had the sliders installed, while the house was still under construction, I did get some leaks whenever it rained. Thankfully, it was only one of the total 4 sliders that actually was leaking. So the best way for me to explain to you what went wrong is to go into the 3D model. So let me show you the system I came up with for installing the sliders. First, I cut the hole out of the container. Second, I used angle irons to create a frame. Third, the frame was inserted into the hole and welded into place. Fourth, the sliding door was installed. Fifth, these small pieces of angle iron trim 1 inch by 1 inch were welded onto the outside to cover up the small shim gaps between the sliding door and the metal frame. And sixth, I used quad caulking to seal and waterproof all around. Now, although this might seem like it should be leak-free in theory, the issue occurred down here. As you can see, my sliding doors have these tiny weep holes on the bottom corners. From the outside edge of the bottom of the door to the weep hole is about a 1/16 of an inch of vinyl plastic, and then the weep hole starts. So basically, the sliding door itself sits on this beam of the shipping container, and this joint right here had to be sealed with caulk. But when I tried to apply the caulk, I only had a 1/16 of an inch to bridge the gap between the steel beam and the bottom of the sliding door. If I applied a bunch of caulk above that 1/16 inch of the door, I'd be plugging up the weep hole. You can't do that. The weep hole is an integral part of the drainage system. So in summary, the entire waterproofness of this system depended on a small bit of caulk hanging off the edge of a cliff of a 1/16 inch bottom of the door. And eventually, probably from opening and closing the sliding door repeatedly, the caulk cracked and water began leaking in. Looking back, I think I should have installed a sill pan that would be completely welded into place inside and out so that it was waterproof. So the next mistake that I made involved drywall. Let me show you. Now there's a few places throughout the house that I made this mistake, but let me show you in the bathroom. So for example, if we come in here and we take a look at this wall here, with normal everyday lighting, you can't really tell what the problem is. Now, if I take a flashlight and provide some really harsh lighting here, you'll probably see what the issue is. So, you can probably see there that kind of change in sort of texture, almost like a bulge popping out of the drywalls, like a big bulge. So basically what caused these bulges was the drywall joint compound that I used and how thick or thin I mixed it. Somewhere along the way when I was doing my research on YouTube on how to do drywall, I stumbled upon a video that said that for the first coat, first taping and first coat, you should mix this to about the consistency of peanut butter. Okay, so that's what I did. Let me go ahead and show you. Again, I'm not a professional drywaller. So you go ahead and you just take it. And yeah, you just fill this joint with a little bit of mud. Probably a little bit too much, but you know, just it could be squeezed out later, or so I thought. So now you just go ahead and you take a little bit of drywall tape with this peanut butter textured drywall compound, and I tried to squeeze it out. This is what happened. I basically came and I passed a knife, and all I get is a tiny little bit of mud. That's a lot of mud back there. I don't know. Let me try again. And then I come and I put more pressure. You know, maybe I'd start in the middle or something. I put more pressure, and I have to really put a bunch of pressure. Now I'm scraping. The tape is now getting like fuzzy and scrapey. The tape was moving, and I was just like, how am I going to get this out? It's not coming out. And so that was essentially the mistake that I made. There was too much mud packed up and built up behind this tape, and I couldn't get it out because it was like a peanut butter texture. So let's go ahead, take this off. And now I'm going to go ahead and remix this, but with more than enough water so that it is finally like what I would say should be something more like yogurt. All right, we're back. I've added in a lot more water, and now we have something that I would say resembles much more like maybe yogurt. I mean, you can just see it. It kind of just oozes off effortlessly. Now, I'm going to come in, put a little bit of pressure over here, and now when I squeeze it out, it's going to come out a lot more easily. A lot of mud came out there. Let's go again. Comes right off. And what's happening is What's happening is a lot of the mass of that bulk of mud that I had under the tape has been squeezed out. So this is now flattened out. So I don't have that bulge which you saw in the bathroom a moment ago under the flashlight. One of the things I heard about, once you do this, you go ahead and you kind of apply just a quick layer of mud on top. And then you basically just come and wipe pretty much all that off. There it is. One more time. That's it. And this was definitely one of those things where the 3D model came in extremely handy. Just having all those measurements down, the dimensions of the rooms, where I would make those cuts. This 3D model is available to download right now. Just click the link in the description below. So as you can see, a critical part of the waterproofing of my roof is this white stuff you see everywhere. This stuff is called Henry Tropical 887. The product is amazing, and nearly 3 years after applying it, it looks in great condition and I haven't had a single drop leak through. But you see that paint roller I'm using to apply the product to the roof? That right there is the mistake I made.
Basically, when you're applying it onto like flat surfaces, really it wasn't a problem. But the thing is, once the paint roller had to get into these corners here between the corrugations, you can see the roof of the container is corrugated. These little corner spots here, trying to get the paint roller to apply it into this sharp corner of the corrugation was really difficult. It required applying a ton of pressure with the paint roller, and it really prolonged and extended the application time of this thing.
One workaround to this issue would have been to buy an airless sprayer. It would have made it much easier to apply, and eventually I would end up buying one of these anyways to paint the exterior of the house.
Well, you see this large panel of glass here? This is actually a panel of glass from one of my sliding doors. There's technically 2 panels of glass, but now there's only one left, because the other side, the other panel, shattered to pieces. Basically what happened was, one day I was doing some welding, some final trim welding here. Basically, if you look over here in the angle iron, you've got these pieces of 1 inch by 1 inch angle iron that runs the whole way all around. And I was welding that into place. The sliding doors were already installed, and I was up over there putting some spot welds on the angle iron, and somehow slag from the weld, even though I did have some pieces of cardboard up to shield the glass from this molten slag, somehow a few drops landed on the glass and the glass literally blew up. In fact, if I show you the other slider here, I had to do welding on this side as well. And if you can actually see this little trail here, this was a piece of molten metal that hit the glass and then slowly fell, burning its way in. But this glass never actually exploded because I don't think the piece of molten metal penetrated deep enough. So the final mistake on this list was quite an emergency, and it involved the windows.
So recall the window installation from earlier. Cut the opening in the container, reinforce with angle iron, and then insert the window. Well, it wasn't until I'd inserted the windows into the openings that I realized my very serious error. Basically, my plan was to secure the window into place by drilling the screws through the jamb of the window and into the angle iron frame I mentioned a moment ago. But for whatever reason, during the planning process, I completely forgot to account for the depth of the window's jamb. And while I originally thought that the screw would pass through the window and land through the angle iron on the outside of the house, it turned out the jamb and the screw landed inside the house and completely missed the angle iron. In other words, it was impossible to secure the window into place. What followed was me going back to the drawing board, back to the 3D model to concoct some kind of retrofit where I could somehow get the window to be secured into place. And so this is what I came up with. Basically, if we take the window out again, you can see we have this angle iron frame. So what I did was I took some scrap angle iron I had lying around, cut off a bunch of pieces about 1.5 inches wide. Okay, so I got this window with the small pieces of angle iron. That's an example of what it looks like, right up into that nook. And I'll have no problem welding right here. And where is it? Right there. Of course, I have it all the way around. I got that L. And then welded these L-shaped pieces onto the existing angle iron frame around that cutout for the window. What I was left with were these little brackets that extended just a bit deeper into the house, creating a landing spot for the screws I insert through the window jamb to land on and secure onto. And ultimately, this system ended up working. The windows were rock solid.
And so that's it for this list of top 10 mistakes I made while building this. Hopefully I'll be taking the lessons that I learned into the second phase of this build. Probably going to be adding a second floor. I think I'm going to be doing it in about a year, adding a second floor to the house, an extension. And I'm hoping that the mistakes I made in building the first floor, I'll learn from those when I move on to the second floor. So that's it for today's video. If you liked it, hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for updates on that second floor that I might start building, which of course I'm going to document in exquisite detail and post here on the channel. So definitely subscribe and hit the bell for that. And that's it for today.